Welcome to podcast number 2 of Chapter 8, the Muscular System. In this podcast, we're going to take a look at how your muscles actually go about movement and making your body move. And the key to this is that they have to work very closely with your nervous system, which controls every aspect of your body. So we're going to start with where your nervous system and your muscles come together. The point where they come together is called a neuromuscular junction. And that is where the end of a nerve is going to come together with the muscle. So it's also called a myoneural junction. So it's two different names. Basically, there are two parts to this junction that are going to come together. The first is the motor neuron endings. So you have three types of neurons in your body. Sensory are going to take information in and send it to your nervous system. Interneurons make up your central nervous system, and then motor neurons are going to send information out. And they're going to send information very often out to your muscles. So this is a fiber that's going to start at your nervous system here and send information out to the muscles and tell the muscles what to do. The spot where they come together on the muscle is called the motor end plate. So every muscle fiber right on its sarcolemma, which remember that is the cell membrane of a muscle, you can have many of these different junctions at or on a particular muscle cell. And they all come together on this one spot. And so the nervous system and the muscular system connect at this motor end plate. The motor end plate has some distinctive features to it. The axon terminal comes down, and here is where the axon is coming right in with the muscle cell, and you can see the muscle fibers in here and the actin and myosin fibers right in there. So a synaptic cleft is a gap where the motor neuron comes down and there is the end plate there. So that is the spot where they meet, and it's called the synaptic cleft. And you will actually see these words again when we do the nervous system. But this cleft is literally a space, and into that space neurotransmitters can be released. So the synapse has the ability to, or at the end of the motor and the neuron ending, you'll have vesicles that are full of things called neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are chemicals. And when a neurotransmitter gets released from the neuron and sent out into the cell it's adjoined to, it's going to stimulate a reaction. It's going to make a reaction happen. And the reaction in the case of your muscle cells would be contraction. So the neurotransmitters, there's a lot of different kinds of neurotransmitters depending on what the body needs to do. But the most common neurotransmitter in your muscle cells is called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is one that you would hear about at any time when you're talking about muscle contraction. It is the most common, and they get released, that chemical gets released when the neuron is told we need this muscle to contract. It gets released in here, and it causes a reaction on the membrane of the muscle cell. The acetylcholine itself does not enter this muscle cell, but it causes a reaction to happen right on the membrane. And once it starts that reaction, it'll keep causing it until it's gone. So there is an enzyme called cholinesterase, very hard word to say, and that is going to get rid of the acetylcholine. And that keeps your muscles from continuously contraction. They break down the acetylcholine, and only once you get another contraction sent down, another impulse sent down, will more acetylcholine get released into that cleft. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. Again, you have your axon from your motor neuron, and it's going to connect at these little things called axon terminals. So here's your actual muscle cell. Remember, you've got mitochondria in there, you've got your myofibrils, which are made of actin and myosin, you got the sarcoplasmic reticulum in there, and that's going to become important in a minute. And where the two come together, okay, the impulse is coming down this way. Here are your vesicles that are filled with your neurotransmitter, in the case of muscles, acetylcholine. And when the impulse reaches the end of this neuron, it's going to release the acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft here. And that's going to cause a reaction to occur at this membrane. Basically, it stimulates the cell to do its job, to do the next thing. Okay? That next thing can be described in something called the sliding filament theory. This is what scientists believe, and they've confirmed for the most part, is happening when your muscles contract. And it's amazing that they can know this much information. So this is the theory of how muscle contracts. Basically, the idea behind it is, remember, you have your thin fibers of actin and your thick fibers of myosin. And what's going to happen is they're going to actually slide past each other. And they do that by making little tiny connections. So we're going to take a closer look at this. In order for this whole thing to happen, okay, you're going to need calcium. One of the main reasons we need calcium is for muscle contraction. But we're also going to need the myosin, which are the thick filaments, right? Actin, which are the thin filaments. And then two other proteins are involved in this called tropomyosin and troponin. And then you're going to need ATP. And remember, your ATP, that is your energy source. Okay, so you actually need a tremendous amount of ATP because every time these two fibers come in contact with each other, they're going to require energy. So let's take a look at the steps of this. There's quite a bit going on. So I'm going to take it step by step, and then we'll take a look at a picture. Okay, so in the very first step, the nerve comes down, and it is going to release the acetylcholine. Okay, so the acetylcholine is going to get released from the neuron, and it's going to stimulate the muscle. Okay, so the neuron is going to tell the muscle it's now time to contract. Okay. Once that happens, the impulse that came from the neuron is going to spread across the sarcolemma. And remember, the sarcolemma is the same thing as the cell membrane. And that impulse goes across the whole cell membrane, and then it enters into the muscle fiber. So now the cell is being stimulated. It's being told you need to do something. What its first reaction is calcium ions are going to diffuse into the sarcoplasm. Remember, sarcoplasm is the same thing as cytoplasm. So all that space outside the nucleus of the cell, where all the different organelles are, is going to get filled up with calcium ions. That calcium was actually being stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, same as the endoplasmic reticulum. But when all that calcium gets released out into the sarcoplasm, it actually makes these things called cross bridges occur. And cross bridges really are little tiny bridges that will connect temporarily the actin and the myosin filaments. So temporarily, the actin and myosin are actually going to be attached to each other, and normally they're not. Okay. When they get attached, that actually allows them to slide. And they slide past each other, and as they slide past each other, the myofibrils, those actin and myosin, the whole sarcolemma, everything shortens up. The sarcomere shortens up. And as that happens, the entire muscle shortens. So these guys are going to connect to each other, they're going to hold on and then pull each other closer, and that shortens the muscle. Okay? And then when it's time for this to stop, we don't want the muscle to contract anymore, and it depends on what you're doing, right? So you might need a longer contraction or a shorter one, but once your nervous system decides it shouldn't be going anymore, the enzyme cholinesterase is going to get released, and the acetylcholine was going to get broken down, and the muscle contraction will stop. So this picture here is a little bit more complicated as to what's going on, but let's just take a look at it real quick one by one. So here's your end of your neuron, and there are your vesicles that have your acetylcholine in them. So the ACH is acetylcholine. So the impulse comes down, okay, and the acetylcholine gets released, and that is causing this reaction to occur throughout the entire muscle. So they're simulating this big purple box here is the inside of the muscle. Okay, the cholinesterase can get there to destroy it, so you don't get more action potential going. Okay, so you only want to go so far. The action potential is going to come in and it's going to stimulate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, remember that's the same as the endoplasmic reticulum, to release those calcium ions out into the cytoplasm. And the calcium is going to cause your actin and myosin to connect to each other. So remember, your thick filaments are your myosin. Okay, and your thin ones are actin. And you can see when these calcium ions come over here, they're actually going to make little bridges, and they're going to make them come up and attach to each other. So the contraction is basically, it's called a power stroke, where the part of the myosin, the thicker one, has a little head on it, and it's going to pull the actin closer to it. So if you notice here, there's a space between the two actin molecules. And here, once that stroke has happened and they get closer together, now the two actin pieces are touching. So you have shortened the molecule. Okay. Once the sarcomere has gotten shorter and everything has gotten shorter within there, you're going to cause another reaction. The calcium is going to go back into, get pumped back into the sarcoplasm, and that's going to take even more ATP. Okay. And then there is another, this is where the troponin and the tropomyosin come together, and they're going to come together and they're going to keep the actin and myosin from bonding to each other. So we don't want them to bond to each other anymore because the contraction is done. So these guys are going to come in and they're going to inhibit it and they're going to keep it from happening. A little bit of a simpler version of this, and this is really the closer to the level that you're going to need to know. Okay, the impulse comes in. So here we have our sarcomere. Okay, one here to here. Okay, you've got your thick bands in here, your actin and your myosin, and they're overlapping in some places, right? And right now they're away from each other. Okay, this is what we're talking about. This is like a little foot, and this is what the cross bridge is going to be. So when the calcium gets released, it's going to cause this little cross bridge, this little foot here, to come down, and it attaches to the myosin, or sorry, the actin, excuse me. So, and then it's going to come over and it's going to kick and pull the actin in. That's called the power stroke. So it attaches from the myosin, it attaches, pulls the actin in, and once it's done pulling it in, it releases, and then it grabs further back and it pulls in some more. So it keeps going until there's little to no space between the actin fibers anymore. The myosin haven't moved. It's the actin that are moving closer. So the sarcomere keeps shortening because the actin filaments are getting pulled towards the center of the sarcomere. So they get pulled in, and that happens. Now remember, you've got millions of these sarcomeres all the way down a muscle fiber. So this is happening all along the muscle fiber as a contraction happens in lots and lots and lots of different places, and that's going to make the contraction occur. So tomorrow in class, we're going to take a look at an animation of this at this website here. If you want to check it out, you're more than welcome to, but we'll go through this again tomorrow in class.